Hello everyone, and welcome to another Bookmas video. Today I want to talk about books which are perfect to read around this time of the year.
Whoa, oh, oh. Da, 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 oh, oh, oh. Da, 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 oh, oh, oh. Da, 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 da. Making our Christmas memories.
So these books can be either like very dark, mystery, thrillery type of books, not necessarily set in the winter time, but more like with like very gray weather, which is I guess really perfect when I look outside because I don't think we had 1 hour of sunshine here in Denmark so far in December. So it really lends itself perfectly to this kind of a gray weather. But also I think if you're like more like a moody type of reader who likes more dark stories, mysteries around this time of the year, I think these books are going to be great. On the other hand, I also have some historical fiction books which I think are also great around this time of the year. But if you really want something more happy, cozy, then I also have another video coming up which will be my cozy winter Christmas book recommendations. And those are going to be those books are going to have a completely different vibe to these ones. But let's get started. So the first one is An Unwanted Guest by Shari Lapena. I have read this at the beginning of the year and I think it's gonna be perfect for around this time because it's set in a very like snowy landscape setting. It is set in an inn or in like a small hotel bed and breakfast somewhere in the mountainside, really remote area where the guests come for like a weekend retreat and then because of the heavy snowfall they get snowed in and they can't leave and then someone is murdered. So we follow these guests for a whole weekend when they try to figure out who's done it. And I think this is kind of perfect if you like an isolated close circle mystery set during winter time. I really love the setting of this. You could really feel like you're in the winter because guests were going outside and it was really, the snow I think played a really big part in this story. The second book is also one where winter plays a big role, and this one is actually set on Iceland. This is book one of a trilogy where we follow a detective. So this is actually one I read very recently, and I really loved it because of the setting. I think Iceland has some, I don't know, I always like books set on Iceland, and I think this is my second one. And the first one of this type, which is kind of a detective story, solving cases, murders and such. So this is The Darkness by Ragnar Jonasson. I think that's how you pronounce it. And we follow an elderly detective. It's a woman who's been a detective for most of her life and now she's on the verge of being retired and she kind of like is looking forward, maybe not so much looking forward to being retired because she has her routine, going to work, she's good at it, comfortable in that position because she has all the knowledge to do her job in the best possible way. But on the other hand, it's also kind of like a sexist environment at work where all her colleagues are kind of male and she as a female is looked, she's like kind of frowned upon. And especially because we can tell that some of her male colleagues got promoted above her, before her, but she wasn't really taken into consideration. So there's all kind of elements to the story of her work, but also elements of her backstory, what happened to her family, because now she's an older lady, she's all by herself. Then we have the case she's working on and she's trying to solve, and it's kind of like a cold case, no one knows what happened, and she's kind of turning back to it because she's kind of forced to retire early and she's given a week to solve any case she wants to. And she picks a case where some women disappeared and no one knows what happened to them. And these women were kind of Russian immigrants, so no one really cares about them either because they have no family, no one who cares about them in Iceland. I really love the story and I really love our main protagonist. I think this is perfect if you like detective stories where they solve murders, and you can really tell that this is kind of like opens up the scene for the next books in this trilogy. And as far as I know, in the next two books we kind of go back in time and we follow the main detective earlier in her life. I have 3 more books here, and these are actually not really wintry per se, but they have this feel, this vibe, which is very like moody, grayish, cold. I think perfect for this time. And the first one is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I've read this not so long ago, and this is also kind of like a mystery more than a murder mystery, because we follow this young lady who comes into her inheritance. She inherits this old house her family owned when she was a child. They moved into that house when she was 6, but only lived there for about a couple of weeks before all the weird stuff that happened in that house kind of drove them away. Her father actually wrote this non-fiction sensationalist haunted house novel, which kind of got really popular. So everyone knows who she is and everyone knows her backstory. She kind of forgot what happened in those 2 weeks while they were living in that house. And now she sees this as a perfect opportunity, now that she owns the house, to go back there, also to resell, but also to kind of figure out what happened in the past. So I think these kind of like isolated house settings and ghostly vibe settings, what happened in the past, are always perfect for this time of the year. And I think Riley Sager is quite like a popular author here on BookTube at least. So I think all of his books, and this one as well, was quite well received this year. So I can only recommend it. Next, I have Blue Bombay by Nicci French, which is book 1 in the Frida Klein series. And this book really, or this series really had made the rounds on BookTube this year, because everyone was kind of reading it who was into mystery thrillery type of books. And especially this one, because we follow a psychoanalyst who is called Frida Klein, and she has her practice, but she kind of gets involved in these police investigations. These are interesting because you follow both Frida Klein, her backstory. She's a really interesting character. There's a lot of mystery surrounding her, especially in the first book. You kind of get pulled in, and not just because of the investigation, but also because of her, who she is, her family background. And there's just some really big mystery in her past we really don't know anything about. It's not even so much, maybe it's even hinted at, but very, very subtly. But you just know that there's something there you will discover in later books. And then I think also the police investigations and the mystery surrounding that is also quite well done. I really loved it, even though I'm not so big a fan of these police procedural type of books. And saying that, I realize already this is the second one on this list. But if you really haven't given the Frida Klein series a go, I think you should go for it, because everyone seems to really enjoy it. And then the last one, I think, is not necessarily a mystery type of book, but it's kind of like a dark story. It is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. And I read this because I've seen this recommended a lot on BookTube, and I didn't really know what this was going into it. So I think maybe this is one to pick up if you're really into a dark story. Maybe like it's kind of like a heavy topic as well. For some reason, this one really sticks to me, and I remember how I felt reading it, and I feel like it's such an important story. So in My Dark Vanessa, we follow Vanessa, who is a young girl, 16. She goes to this new school, and there she's kind of seduced by her teacher, her English teacher. And they have this on-off relationship for many, many years until she's like 30. She cannot really even move on with her life, because she doesn't know if what they had is a love story or what they had, or was she abused as a child, was she taken advantage of. So I think it's kind of a hard one to read, so you should be aware going into it. But at the same time, I think it's such a compelling one because of the main character. She's really not such a likable girl. But at the same time, you have to remember that she's the victim here, even though you kind of like, you're really not sure whether you like her or not. So yeah, My Dark Vanessa is definitely a contender if you really want a dark, moody read, which is kind of like pulls you in and really makes you, it really makes you feel. And yeah, really makes you think as well about how we perceive, how we look at these girls, these young women, or women in general who have been in these kind of relationships. Now we're coming into the historical fiction ones, and I have one that I read recently, which is The Foundling by Stacey. And this one is great because I love the mood it sets, and it's set in London in the beginning of 1800s, or the late 1700s, somewhere like that, where we follow a young woman and her life as a hawker in London, really poor, really exposed, I would say, for a woman being in that kind of a job or situation. She lives with her father, and then she gets pregnant. She has to give the baby up because she cannot take care of the baby. She doesn't have the means to do so. So she takes the baby to the Foundling house, which is like kind of an orphanage where you take your baby to be raised, and then if you want to take the baby back or the child back some years later, you can do so. You only have to pay for the upkeep. So our main protagonist always plans to go back after the child. And then when she does, she kind of discovers that according to the Foundling house, she already picked up her daughter right after she kind of delivered her there, so the second day. So she's like, what happened? It wasn't me. She kind of tries to figure out what happened to her girl, and the story moves on from there. So it's kind of like a mystery as well in some way. And I liked the setting in London, and I liked how it looked at, you know, that part of society which is kind of overlooked in these historical fiction novels many times, I would say, the poor and how they live and so on and so forth. I think this one gave a lot of great details into that part of society. And then I have two more, and one of them is Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. I think this is my second Margaret Atwood. I read The Handmaid's Tale before, and why I think this is a great story for now, it's because you really get to know who Grace, our main character, is. You really follow her throughout her life, so it's a story you can really immerse yourself into, and I think that's kind of the perfect story for this time of the year. So we follow Grace, who kind of grew up poor in Ireland, I believe, and then they emigrated to Canada with her family. And there she kind of ended up being a servant. And she was accused actually of murdering her employers. So the story goes, she gets convicted, and then she spends a lot of years in prison. And then there's this doctor who kind of like fascinated by her and tries to figure her out, kind of psychoanalyze her. So we kind of go back and forth with the present and the past, where we follow Grace growing up, coming to Canada, and how her different employments went and so on and so forth. And this is such a compelling book because you kind of end up really liking this main character. She's such an intelligent, soft, beautiful woman. Everyone thinks it is really not possible that she did this heinous crime. And the more you read, the more you get to know her, you also kind of doubt whether she did it or not. You really question it at least. And I think that's what makes the story great. It also gives you a great historical background of that period within the medicine industry, I would say, but also how just generally people lived. And actually this is based on a true story, so why not? And the very last one I have for you is The Good People by Hannah Kent. I have read Hannah Kent's previous book, The Burial Rites, some years ago, and I think that's one of my favorite books of all time. So I've been meaning to pick up her other book for a while, and I finally did. And oh my god, this is also a great one. It's kind of like a heavy one, much heavier, I would say, than Alias Grace, because this is set in the 1800s and 1820s, I would say, in England, where we follow characters in this remote village where they kind of live. It feels like they live kind of removed from modern society, where they're really much living for the land, and they're so superstitious that it's unbelievable. So there's also kind of a gang mentality in this town, where they pick on a few people and kind of, for some reason, because of this superstitious nature, they kind of start blaming them for all the bad things that start happening. And here we follow a widow who's taking care of her grandchild. Her grandchild is sick, and she doesn't really know what's happening to this grandchild, why this child is sick, because she remembers a healthy child from when she visited her daughter some years ago. But now the child is sick, and she is convinced that this child is a changeling. There is this servant, she works for her, and then there's this medicine woman in town, and it's like the three of them kind of like the core of this story, and what's happening to this child, to this sick child. And I think this one is also great because you can really feel the mood in that small town. It's like the superstition plays such an important role, and it can be so dangerous to be so superstitious, of course. And this is also based on a true story. So I think Hanneken does this so great, where it really captures the mood in these isolated settings, much in the same way as in Burial Rites. And I can only recommend her books. I think the Burial Rites would also be a great one for this time of the year. And that's one also set in Iceland. So these are all the books I have for you. Let me know what books you turn to around this time of the year. I would be interested to know. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.
Making our Christmas memories.